Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Aldon from Northwestern University, and I'm the moderator for this particular workshop or panel or whatever you call it. And it's really a pleasure to be here with you all today. The title of this particular panel is Intersectionality and State Power. I believe that's right. We have it right in front of me. But at any rate, we have four presenters, and we'll go in the order that I have here. First is Geneva Brown, and she is an associate professor at Valparaiso University School of Law. And her presentation pertains to the intersectionality of race, gender, and reentry. Challenges for African American women entering their community after incarceration. Is that the right title?
That's right.
And then Joseph E. He is currently a research fellow at the Fiscal Austerity and Urban Innovation. I believe that's based at the University of Chicago. Yeah, that's right. And his presentation addresses the dynamics of separation and inclusion in American society. Next is Shaun Ossei-Owusu. Shaun Ossei-Owusu. Is that right? Yes, sir. I want to get it right. And he is a second-year doctoral student and National Science Foundation Fellow, African American Studies at UC Berkeley. And his presentation concerns the discretion of street-level bureaucrats in the criminal justice system, and how their discretion affects mass incarceration. And then lastly is Courney Marshall, who is currently an assistant professor of English and Women's Studies at the University of New Hampshire. And her presentation concerns how segregation law and literature debated the definition of black womanhood in the 19th century. And so they each will have somewhere between 15 and 18 minutes to present. And we then definitely will have a chance to have a conversation with you. So,
Good morning. Good morning. I am presenting on basically the intersectionality and the effects of the laws and how they affect African American women who have been released from prison. I was a public defender in Wisconsin for 9 years, in Milwaukee and other areas. And I began to notice that no matter what I did or performed in my duties in doing criminal defense, my clients were going to prison as opposed to having probation, and they're going to prison for longer sentences. And it really scared me to step back from being through individual cases and figure out what was going on. I didn't know, and they didn't have the term mass incarceration. They hadn't quite hit the trial level yet, as it is now. The trends were sweeping upward in the mid-90s. So that's basically what stirred my interest in this area. It's a very personal thing to watch a setting go through the system constantly, and no matter what you do, it doesn't seem to change anything. So you know it's a systemic issue, not necessarily an individual issue. So I read about human Marshall's intersectionality when I was in law school, and it really fit the issues that I found that I was addressing in my scholarship. So with the issue of incarceration in the African American community is very troubling. At this point, we have between African American men and women approximately 1 million people who are currently incarcerated, and upwards in the millions of people who are in the systematic probation alone and currently incarcerated. So the effects have been devastating in the African American community. But when you talk about the literature, it always focuses on African American as men. When we talk about gender, it is always as women. That the research research and literature shows. So what I'll be talking about are first the mass incarceration trends in the African American community, reentry policy, and how those things affect the African American women in particular. This all starts with what we now know as the war on drugs. And the roots of this go back to the Nixon administration and its basically war on crime back in the early 70s, late 60s. The introduction of mandatory minimum sentences, introduction of enhancement for firearms, enhancement for having weapons within certain schools, things like that. But it didn't take off until the 1980s with the president of the Reagan administration and the social construction of what we would call the crack mother, the black welfare mother, all of these negative images that had an effect on how drug users were perceived and how black women drug users were perceived as well. Also with the change in sentencing disparity between crack and powder cocaine in federal sentencing and also in state sentencing policy. So you began to see the differential in those who use crack cocaine going to prison longer than those who use powder cocaine. And culturally, it was known that African Americans were more likely to use crack cocaine versus powder cocaine. However, drug usage overall was pretty much across the board the same. But we began to see a disparity in those who were going to prison and those who were arrested for use of drugs. So if you target a particular type of drug, and you also saw a $9 billion increase in the Clinton administration towards the entire prison industrial complex. So between the 80s and 90s, you see millions, and if not billions of dollars being poured into what Angela Davis has called the prison industrial complex, which also contributes to the rise of mass incarceration in the African American community. Currently, there are 2.1 million people who are incarcerated in U.S. prisons and jails. Of those, if you wanted to do for 100,000 people, 4,800 African American men are locked up per every 100,000. For white men, it's generally 727 per 100,000. For African American women, it's 349 per 100,000. For white women, it's 93. So you're talking about a vast, disproportionate population that has happened in our sentencing policy.
What was that figure again for one black women?
Black women is
4.8 per thousand for black women.
it's 349 per 100,000.
Thank you.
So you see a growth overall of incarceration in the private state prisons and federal prisons. We had 12,200 women locked up. As of 2004, the Department of Justice estimates 104,000 women have been locked up. The percentages are astronomical, and the use of drugs doesn't match the increase in the overall population incarceration. Of the 200,000 women that are currently incarcerated, 67,000 or 33% are African American women. So they become the dominant female, disproportionately the dominant female incarcerated population. And Paula Johnson basically says that the U.S. government is measuring things, as I have already said, about gender and also about race. African American women are invisible. So it's hard to tease out these statistics. You have to go through almost a decade's worth of studies to find a particular, to find trends in African American incarceration. As of 1991, the Department of Justice estimated the average woman who was incarcerated was African American between the ages of 25 and 34, and also someone who had either unemployed and also had a high school diploma or a GED. So that's the population that's been incarcerated. Reentry is the effects after, obviously, you have been mass incarceration. You're going to have mass reentry as well. Currently, there are 650,000 people that are being released annually into their communities. But the laws that have been passed through the Reagan administration and also through the Clinton administration have frustrated those policies for reentry for African American overall population, but it's the intersectionality of being African American and being a woman that makes it particularly harsh. Reentry laws in general, when you have the social construction of the crack mother or the crack whore or all these other things that come from the 80s, what federal government did was to pass laws. We demonize drug users so bad that we obviously have socially isolated them, and we made it that when you do things like public housing, if you are a drug offender, you are not entitled or allowed to have access to public housing. So if you are released from prison, where do you go? If you are, and your family can't accept you back if you are on the public housing grant. As far as employment goes, many local entities have passed laws that bar you from having an occupational license. So if you're a felon, you're not able to get a real estate license. You're not able to get a license for being the most mundane things, a security guard. And for African American women, you can't get a cosmetology license, and that's a profession that is dominated by African American women. So California in particular bars real estate, nursing, physical therapy, and education, but you're not going to be a teacher, obviously, also. So the unemployment rate for ex-offenders is, and at this point, obviously, the statistics I really worked before the recession of 2001, so I see this even worse. So I had estimates of 60%, but it's higher than that now. Also, you have laws that bar offenders from getting federal assistance, such as receiving grants or work study and loans. And so that has its effect as well. But the intersectionality comes in when you talk about the things that are specific for African American women. And in particular, it has to do with things as in the child welfare system, the profile of woman who is generally incarcerated also. So while I'm giving you an overall idea of what the federal laws are and also what mass incarceration means in the numbers, let me now talk about intersectionality and how these laws affect, in particular, African American women. In general, women who are incarcerated have a tendency to have a history of physical and sexual abuse. Many of them before the age of 18. 69% before the age of 18 were either physically or sexually abused, based on Department of Justice statistics. Women also report, in general, that they are not able to get drug, alcohol, or any other sort of psychological counseling. A recent study showed that only 10% of the incarcerated population, including men and women, were able to access services. And just listening on a daily basis as to under the current crisis, these are the programs that get cut first. So it's even getting worse as I'm writing this and researching that there are even fewer programs for those who have these problems. Also, in particular, with African American women, is the presence of HIV. The overall number one population of women who are HIV positive disproportionately are African American women. It mirrors what you see in society. HIV/AIDS is the number one killer of women between the ages of 25 and 44, and that's mirrored also in the incarcerated population. So it is something that is exacerbated, obviously, if you are part of the incarcerated population. Let me majority of African American women who are incarcerated are mothers. Over 60% are mothers. And so the question is, what happens to the children? In particular, I want to address this part of the talk about the child welfare system. The Government Accountability Office did a report on the foster care system and the disproportionality of African Americans or children of color in the system. That stems from the fact that we have an overrepresented population of childbearing age incarcerated, and they still don't stop having children, so the children are transferred to the foster care system. Well, African American children make up 15% of the children in the U.S. 27% of children overall are in the foster care system. The overwhelming majority of children in the foster care system are disproportionately African American, and it mirrors the results of poverty and incarceration as well. And the federal government passed what's called the Adoption and Safe Family Act of 1997. The idea of the act was to limit the time that children stay in foster care. It was a good idea. The unfortunate effects are that if you have a child that remains in the foster care system beyond a 12 to 18 month period, termination of parental rights go into effect. The problem is when you have the average sentence of a woman who's incarcerated is over 3 to 4 years in prison, this obviously triggers termination of parental rights, or it triggers a crisis in the child and the mother relationship. So the idea of APSA has become problematic because you do have states who are actively terminating parental rights of mothers who are either incarcerated or recently reintroduced into the community, but who can't get permanency plans together. Permanency plans meaning, are you going to take care of the child? How are you going to take care of yourself? Are you employed? Or can you give this child back to you? If you're not able to fit within the permanency plan and the courts give you a particular time to get yourself together, then they seek termination of parental rights. So obviously, with of the 1.7 million children who have parents who are incarcerated, 700,000 of them are African American children. So this triggers termination, overwhelming issues of termination of parental rights, foster care issues, and a lot of states don't pay for representation of parents when they go into the child welfare system. So this is, for African American women, is a particularly devastating issue that you risk losing your children once you are incarcerated, or once you are released and you're not able to get the housing, the education, the other things that are reviewed for them. In particular, I just want to briefly talk about the things that I mentioned before: public assistance, education, and housing. These are federal laws that bar drug offenders or felons from having access to public assistance. So again, if you are a woman who's been released from prison, your child is potentially in foster care, or else you have someone else taking care of your child, you're not able to take care of your child because of the prior felony. You're not basically able to have access to public funds because of that. If you're not able to get in higher education because the Higher Education Act bans you from having access to education, public things that we took for granted certainly got me for my education. If you're not able to live, I mean, we have limited public housing estimates, but if you're not able to access a Section 8 grant, if you're not able to access any sort of federal or state housing, how do you preserve the African American family? What do you do for the thousands of women that are released from prison who are barred because of these draconian laws and their effects on unfortunately, you have a high recidivism rate overall, but the impact is between 60 and 70% in women who are really exposed to go back to prison. And that's because the presence of releasing someone without services, without family, and without their child frustrates the entry for this particular population. So, obviously, what I'm suggesting be done is an overhaul in this progressive legislation and funding to assist women transitioning back into the system. There was a panel yesterday of incarcerated women who talked about the frustration of getting back into the culture, getting back into what it, and you have the application that asks, are you a felon? And what is the impact on things? Those kind of questions, the impact of the laws that have been passed because of our war on drug policy have been devastating for the African American community, in particular this subsection that seeks to get itself released, get back into the culture. But what is there to get back to if laws don't allow you to function in everyday normal life? It frustrates the entry and the integration process.
Thank you, Professor Brown.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Joseph E. This is a picture from my first book, published it last year. Its title is God and Karate on the South Side. The title of my topic for, by the way, this picture. This is the largest martial arts school in the south side of Chicago. So the instructor is Caucasian, but most of the students are African American, but they all shout in Korean, so it's pretty nice, like Tiro Tora. And then, and it's the largest, and it's also the most multi-ethnic institution in the south side of Chicago. Because today a lot of the liberal professors, they don't send their kids to churches, but they will send them to a karate school. So it's one of the few institutions where we have both liberal professors and Christian fundamentalists kicking each other in a good way. So, it's fine. And and Obama, one of my neighbors, he did Taekwondo for 4 years in Chicago. Only got up to green belt though. Hardly went to Korea, he got his honorary black belt. So, it's very nice. Anyway, so the title of my presentation is The Dynamics of Separation and Inclusion. The literature in race and ethnicity, there's two prevailing perspectives. The liberal progressive, basically, this comes from Bernard Murdoch, which is that liberal democratic ideals lead to racial integration. In contrast, King and Smith, there's undercurrent of racism that leads to racial divisions and inequality. Both perspectives have the assumption that there's a connection between micro individual liberal beliefs and macro outcomes. If Americans truly believed in racially egalitarian ideals, then we should have racially egalitarian outcomes. My point is that this contradicts, American political culture is very contradictory, that people can strongly proclaim liberal democratic beliefs and denounce racial discrimination, but act in ways that still collectively perpetuate historic divisions and inequalities. I have two models of democracy. One I call small scale versus large scale. In the civil rights era, I highlight two divergent models. One is one state society that's composed of formally equal, legally equal, or practically separate groups. And the idea is that an individual can best discuss and practice her beliefs and aspirations within a bounded, homogeneous group. That is either impractical or undesirable to recruit others to one's group. And this small-scale conception of democracy reinforces a trend among people to sort themselves along increasingly homogeneous groupings. So basically, we don't talk across divisions, whether liberals, conservatives, black or white, whatnot. There's just very little interaction. It's a small-scale conception of democracy. But then there's another conception that views America as composed of dynamic, interdependent individuals, that an individual practices their beliefs and aspirations in conjunction with multiple others, within and without particular groups. So the idea is that we're all connected, we're all interdependent, and we should, and this creates space for religious, social, and political movements that actively recruit different people and broaden the sense of we. the collective identity. And my final point is that groups that valorize older Christian and civic Republican ideals, such as some Christians and military veterans, reflect and reinforce both models. So again, my point is that American political culture is composed of both liberal, Republican, and Christian traditions, and this can both unify or divide Americans. Okay. I have a small, and this is my theoretical historical background, that a liberal democratic culture. So my general point is I'm not saying that America is a liberal democracy. I'm saying a liberal democratic culture by itself has a tendency to both divide and unify. Because one, a liberal democratic culture needs social capital, fears domination. And so liberal democratic culture either wishes to exclude or assimilate outsiders. For example, I have a quote from Lincoln, as I will not be of slaves, I will not be of master. This expresses my idea of democracy. So people back then thought, slaves, the slavery system, or even the Catholics were threats to American freedom. Okay. So there's a tendency in democratic culture to either exclude or assimilate outsiders. From during New Deal and World War II era, there was a movement from unequal and separate to equality and assimilation. And there's a quote from Robert Dahl: "In New Haven, as in many parts of the United States, vast social energies have been poured into a process of Americanization, teaching citizens what is expected in the ways of words, beliefs, and behavior if they're to acceptance as Americans." This was 1960. But then, according to historian C. Van Woodward, there was a backlash in 1965, including from some African Americans, that people didn't want assimilation. For example, some African Americans considered assimilation or integration into white society to be a betrayal of their racial heritage. That it wasn't true equality and integration, it was more domination. So, and then my point is that there's a downside to small-scale model, which is that it both reflects and reinforces social and political distress across social categories, and it could perpetuate historic inequalities. If assimilation to shared norms and institutions is seen as not possible, then the citizen seeks to either exclude or minimize their ties with a problematic other. And then I ground this historical theoretical background in terms of my current ethnography. I'm currently looking at educated second-generation religiously conservative Korean Americans in Orange County. And for many of these Korean Christians, the problematic other are both the mostly black, brown underclass and the mostly white secular overclass. And so the dominant frame for a lot of Koreans in Orange County is that interacting with different races is not going to get me to Harvard, right? I shouldn't go to any school that has a lot of Hispanic or black kids because it's not going to get me to Harvard. It's not going to get me into. It's not good for my self-interest. And this is a dominant frame among many of the students and parents. I have a quote from Esther Kim, high school volunteer. "I was walking with one of my oldest friends, Christine, a typical rich Asian girl, when we bumped into Jose. Just when she was describing how her dad was going to buy her first Benz, Jose yelled at me, 'What's up, my homie? Hey, good to see you out here.' A bit startled, I replied with a secret handshake. And then Christine yelled later, 'Who the hell is that? And how do you know him? And why do you know him?' Explained that Jose is one of my new friends from the soup kitchen. She gave me a 5-minute lecture about how I shouldn't talk, look, or touch with those kind of men on the street, so I'm going to get raped." And this is very prevalent. There's an Allen middle school student. We were having a small group discussion about The Blind Side. Anyone seen it? The movie? Okay. Anyway, we read the book. We read the chapter, The Blind Side, and then she was talking to me, and she wrote a written response about Leanne, because Alan's very Christian. And I asked her, what did Leanne do? What would Jesus do? What would you do? Right? And she basically said, well, Leanne took Michael over in because he was just, he invited Michael over for Thanksgiving dinner. And obviously Jesus would do the same thing. He loves everybody. But practically speaking, I'm not going to do it. Because I don't trust people. So I know this is what Jesus would do, but I don't think I do. So it's incongruence between what Jesus would do and what I would do. Okay. And also, there's also the spirit of overclass, basically those secular Harvard people that many Korean evangelical pastors warned the second generation about secular humanism among universities. Joseph, high school senior, said that my high school counselor told me not to mention religion in my college essay because I'm not going to get into Harvard that way. So anyway, that's the small scale. But then there's also this conception of large scale democracy, equal and together. And my basic point is that people are not like per se, negative about blacks and African Americans or Latinos. It's just that organizations and institutions mediate one's experience with diversity. If all you know is dysfunctional, chaotic institutions, then it worsens interethnic relations. And there was a quote from the New York Times, John, who talked about how I'm the person that attended inner city school, 3rd, 7th, and 8th grade. I was always the weak one, and then there was a lot of teasing. I was of Indian descent, and students were always shout Bin Laden coming through in the hallways. And so the idea is that dysfunctional, chaotic institutions worsen interethnic relations. So basically, people like John fled the inner city. In contrast, functional, authoritative organizations foster positive contact across ethnic and economic lines. Some examples include the KIPP charter schools, Tocqueville talked about the Catholic Church, how a strong hierarchical institution brings all classes of society together. I also see that with my karate school, where you have this strong hierarchy of belts. So everybody starts as a white belt, we all start the same. You go up the ladder. By the time you become a black belt, you feel the solidarity that crosses, racial and economic lines. The Chicago Church of Christ, for excelling. And so this is an alternate frame, which is that interaction leads to personal success. So there's a very different frame between like education, that you shouldn't interact with other races, versus like an Amway meeting. Has anyone been there? Okay, it's like, you go to Amway and it's like, you have to interact with different races. You have to open up new markets. And by interacting and making all kinds of different friends, more money, right? And this is a very different frame of mind. So Koreans who are Harvard bound act very differently than the Koreans who want to be Amway. Diamond. That's better than Harvard, right? Okay. And number 3, people do not oppose assimilation per se, but fear domination by the disliked other, such as white people or Christians. So in a divided society, according to Rousseau and Leon Lawgiver, relatively new or outside organizations bring together groups that do not communicate in established settings. And so the point is that you don't want to be dominated by by like the disliked other. So you need to bring in an outsider to bring different groups together. And so organizations that combine the hierarchy with the outsider status are more likely to bridge differences. And examples include karate schools that I mentioned, and also among religious groups, what I contrast the New Line conservatives. Basically, religious conservatives who are not part of the religious establishment, such as Jehovah's Witnesses and Pentecostals. I have some graphs in the end, if I have time, but my general point is that heterogeneous social capital leads to politics of inclusion, trust, and moderation, a large-scale conception of democracy. And so the point is that in terms of sequencing, you need to first make friends. First make friends with different people and then discuss politics. And then before you discuss healthcare. Because, like the Tea Party, once you realize that, we're friends, we do martial arts, or we go to Jehovah's Witness meetings together. And so, I cannot call you a socialist, or I cannot call you, racist. I need to, because I know you as a person. So it tends to moderate you, makes discussion a bit more rational. Because my point is that emotion is very much linked to rational discussion, right? Okay. Implications that American political culture is compatible with both separation and assimilation. Homogeneous and heterogeneous, small scale, large scale. We can debate what is a proper balance, but many progressives contend that American society is too divided, too fragmented. And this really undermines progressive politics, such as healthcare reform. And so we need to, and this also undermines state capacity, state power, that according to Burke, the greatest injustice is a feeble, weak state. And so the emerging progressive agenda is to create a more large-scale conception of democracy, what Robert Putnam calls broadening the we. And so, that's the question for scholars like me. How do you interact with people whose background and views are so different from yours? How do you develop this kind of social capital, develop social trust? And what are the best means? Is it like maybe more? Is it more direct methods like sensitivity training and ethnic studies classes, or more indirect like salsa class or like salsa dancing, right? And so what are the mix of methods that we can use to create this kind of heterogeneous social capital, create social trust across social categories? And if you have time, you could stop me whenever. I have some tables. This is from the General Social Survey.
In about 3 more minutes.
Okay. All right. So talk medium fast. Okay. So this is all theory, right? Ethnography. Now I have GSS because I'm a political scientist. Okay. Now I've broken down churches, as you can see. Mainline churches, including liberal, moderate, and online fundamentalists, they tend to be very racially segregated. So only like 33% of Southern Baptists claim to attend interracial worship. In contrast to liberal churches, more active. 58% Episcopalians, 65% Unitarians claim to attend interracial worship. But the highest race of interracial worship are the New Line fundamentalists, Pentecostals, Assembly of God, Pentecostals, Apostolic Faith, and especially the Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses. 85% of Jehovah's Witnesses claim to attend interracial worship, and not only that, 65% attend church on a weekly basis or more.
So do you have any black denominations?
Well, some people categorize the AFC as a black church, but then I think it started as a black church, but it's become very multiracial, right? So the point is that you could start out white or black, but you don't have to stay that way. Like most Baptist churches started out black and white, they're still black and white, right? But then AFC became multiracial, Jehovah's Witness became multiracial. So I think these are my 2 favorite examples. Black church, white church, branch out. Not only are these churches racially diverse, but they're also, because remember we talked about Unitarians, 65% of Unitarians claim to attend interracial worship, but 99% of Unitarians are white. So where's that, how are you attending interracial worship? Is it like, I don't know, but is it like, did you get tan or something else, or is it like just imagining? But in contrast, look at Jehovah's Witnesses or Apostolic Faith, much more robust levels of interracial worship. Apostolic Faith, 40% white, 40% black. Jehovah's Witnesses, 61% white, 30%, 7.9 other. And not only are they racially diverse, they're also diverse in terms of educational class status. 36%, so less than high school, more than high school. So there's very strong diversity, both economically and racially. Now regression, political scientists love regression. So I broke it down for white people and black people, and as you can see, being Catholic and old line fundamentalists and new line, these are all significant. So being Catholic, you're 1.865 times more likely to attend interracial worship. If you're old line fundamentalist, you're white Southern Baptist, you're less likely. But if you're white, like Apostolic Faith or Jehovah's Witness, you're like 1.603 more likely. So it makes a difference. So just because you're religiously conservative doesn't mean you're like segregated. Depends on what kind of religious conservative you are. And all my findings are significant. And same thing with African Americans. For African Americans, being Catholic makes you 5 times more likely to attend interracial worship. If you're old line fundamentalist, you're half as likely. If you're new line, you're almost 1.5 times more likely. So again, for blacks, even more stronger effect. What kind of conservative you are. Moving on, relationship of churches. And churches also has an impact in terms of interracial dinner. Let me make this. Okay. So interracial worship is linked to interracial dinner. So for example, Episcopalians, 35% claim interracial dinner, but Jehovah's Witnesses, 50%. And this is remarkable because a lot of people are Episcopalians. They're very educated, they have jobs and other opportunities to have interracial worship. Jehovah's Witnesses tend to be less educated, and so they're depending on the church to have interracial dinner, and half of them do. And if you're African American, Jehovah's Witness, 78.4%. It's almost a guarantee. If you're black and you join Jehovah's Witness, you're gonna have interracial dinner. They're gonna, it's just a given. Okay. And then odds ratio. This is also supported. Again, that if you no matter, it doesn't matter what church you attend, as long as you attend interracial worship, you're 1.4 times more likely to have interracial dinner. Oh, wait, this is government to blacks. I have another one. Okay, I have another logistic, but I didn't include on my tables. Now, my final point is that interracial worship also has a moderating effect on government aid to blacks. If you're a white person, and you attend interracial worship, you're 1.4 times more likely to support government aid to blacks. In contrast, if you're a black person, you're less likely to support government aid to blacks. Do you understand? So there's a mild convergence. At first, black and whites are very divided on government aid to blacks, but if you attend interracial worship, you become more, white people become more likely to support, and black people become less likely. And I interpret that to mean that black people want to be more inclusive, so you think government should help all people, not just blacks. Okay. So I have some other tables which show that there is even among Southern whites, there is a big gap. So New Line fundamentalists such as Jehovah's Witnesses are much more likely to support government aid to blacks than Southern Baptists, if you happen to be a Southern white person. Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the basis of my presentation emerges out of a working paper that's being revised for the American University Journal of Gender Law and Social Policy, titled "Giving More: Centering Gender Inequality in Criminal Justice and Discretion Discourse." So I welcome any kind of constructive comments or feedback that might help me buttress my argument and analysis. So much of the literature in the criminal justice system focuses on criminality, putative or actual, and it examines how discriminatory practices and policies disproportionately impact blacks and Latinos. So this literature has been important to our understandings of crime and inequality, but I argue they neglect the role of bureaucratic discretion, which is an important site for race, class, and gender inequality in the criminal justice system. So by bureaucratic discretion, I'm talking about the decision-making of actors in the legal system who carry out policies, police, prosecutors, judges, etc. Now, when discretion is considered, analysts typically focus on individual stages as opposed to thinking about discretion more broadly. So I argue that when we do look at discretion, we see that in most stages in the system, from investigations to arrests, to police reports, to interrogations, to prosecutorial charging, to sentencing, to probation, to parole, and then to the decision to take someone's life, that discretion is one of the key features of racial, gender, and class inequality. So related to this idea is my assertion that a lot of this literature hasn't really engaged Professor Crenshaw's idea of intersectionality seriously. So I argue that intersectionality provides robust insights into bureaucratic decision-making and inequalities in the system, and my presentation is premised around this idea. So I focus on women of color because it's important not to fall into what Devin Carvalho calls black male racial victimhood, where we imagine black men or Latino men as being the most vulnerable to and endangered by a crime or the criminal justice system. I also think it's important to heed the insights of feminist criminologists who pointed to the masculine nature of that field. And it's often a field that treats men as a norm and women as anomalies, or when women are considered, they just add women to the discussion and stir, but don't really give a substantive analysis of gender or gender, race, and class. So essentially I'm arguing that looking at women of color's experiences with the systems illuminates these mechanisms of decision-making in the system. So in that way, I think this presentation is very much in conversation with what Professor Brown is talking about. So now I'll give a quick roadmap to my paper. So first I deal with some semantics in terms of thinking about discretion,
Then I describe how bureaucratic discretion disproportionately impacts women of color in different stages in the system, and then I conclude with some thoughts. So before I start, I have to give some quick caveats. So the first is, I'm not trying to say that discretion is the full explanation for inequality in the system. It's inherently necessary for an efficient system because sometimes the civic and social costs of bringing a lawbreaker into the criminal justice system may exceed the benefits. So we can't designate discretion as something that's good or bad, but we have to look at how this necessary device produces inequality. And the second thing is that I just don't give the full gamut of stages in the system, because it's impossible to do in 15 minutes. But I offer a few just to argue this larger cumulative point. So 2.1, understanding discretion. So Roscoe Pound identifies discretion as an authority conferred by law to act in certain conditions or situations in accordance with an official's or an official agency's own considered judgment and conscience. So Pound is pointing to what we might think of as discretionary power and the ability of state actors to determine legal outcomes, which is a kind of popular understanding of discretion that's often used in the law and in the social sciences. But what I'm arguing is that we have to append this definition with the conceptualization of discretion that points to the discrete nature of this decision making in the criminal justice system. So anecdotally, we can think about Big Mama or your grandmother telling you to use discretion, baby. But more seriously, we can think about this discreteness as it entails like non-transparency, so the police trope of the blue wall of silence. Or if we think about the non-transparent nature of prosecutorial discretion, where they're exempted from the typical restraints and limitations and reviews of administrative discretion that we typically have on other governmental agencies and actors. So thinking about the non-transparent nature of discretion is what I'm arguing. And I'm saying that this understanding of discreteness is important to understanding discretion because the power to conceal, whether you're doing it intentionally or unintentionally, this power to conceal fundamentally guides and changes legal outcomes and is a key feature of penal bureaucracy. 2.2, widening our lens. So the reason why we have narrow approaches to discretion are institutional and intellectual. So institutionally, police chiefs, prosecutors, judges, they're all overwhelmed by their professional duties and they have little time for substantive communication with each other. And in contrast, intellectually, academics just over-specialize, which leads to expert in racial profiling to know a little bit about plea bargaining. And moreover, despite the sexiness of interdisciplinarity in the academy, scholars often get invested in their disciplines, methodologies, and their explanatory value, which kind of limits how we can think about bureaucratic discussion. But what I want to argue is that if we look more expansively, then we get to see the larger systemic problems as opposed to kind of individual instances of misused discretion. So in fact, I think one of the challenges to addressing misused discretion is getting people to realize that these problems don't lay in the individual behavior of one person, but more in terms of entire institutionalized systems of police and prosecutorial training, culture, and management. So let's look at some stages. So first we can look at preemptive police practices and investigations. So preemptive practices and investigations are an important site of analysis because they simply entail crime prevention. So first let's think about this for potential suspects who are women of color. So racial profiling is a term that's been common in our national lexicon on crime, but less critical attention has been given to gender profiling and the gender element of preventative policing. So the landmark case here is Terry versus Ohio, and it's important to consider because it said the Fourth Amendment is not violated when police stop and frisk someone for weapons, as long as they believe that they have reasonable suspicion that the suspect is armed, has committed a crime, or will commit a crime. So Terry pretty much expands police discretion and has significant race and class undertones because it's in Black and Latino neighborhoods where These are going to be spaces where police could just use subjective perceptions of danger as subterfuge to assert their authority. So now women of color are often presumed to be either central or peripheral actors in the drug trade. And their categorization as drug carriers leaves them especially vulnerable to these abuses of terror. So socially stigmatized women such as the mentally ill, homeless, immigrants, transgender women, domestic violence survivors, sex workers, and female drug users are specific targets of police misconduct via this preemptive discretionary power. And these women are less likely to report misconduct because of general fear or a warranted distrust in the police, as well as language barriers, fears of being deported, or arrested for prior criminal conduct. But when these women do report crimes, they're often unlikely to be believed, which reduces our ability to really fully grasp the criminal justice system and gender dynamics. So here we see how the discrete nature of police decision-making coupled with state-sanctioned power can produce intersectional race and gender inequality that can often just go unnoticed. So over-policing typically dominates the discussion on crime and inequality, but under-enforcement of the law is an equally, if not more, egregious phenomenon because it's not subject to review, formal statistics of under-enforcement are not kept, and it decreases the amount of crime that's officially recognized, but it increases real crime by giving offenders solace and knowing that certain crimes just aren't going to be investigated rigorously. So under-policing or under-enforcement manifests itself through unsolved homicides, slow or non-existent 911 responses, and the tolerance of open-air drug markets, as well as low levels of violence, property crimes, and public disorder. So this under-enforcement has severe consequences for women of color. First, intersectionally disadvantaged women become more vulnerable to various kinds of crimes, like assault, rape, sexual violence, and robbery. Again, as these perpetrators believe that these cases just won't be investigated thoroughly. And some argue that under-policing creates a more precarious situation for female residents by normalizing violence against women and weakening their own expectations of state protection. So the ethnographic work of the late Esther Madriz shows us how fear of crime uniquely impacts women of different ages and socioeconomic backgrounds, and it just restricts their freedom by determining when and where to travel, what route to take, how to dress, and how to act, and it reinforces their subordination. So in sum, we see how bureaucratic discretion to under-police exacerbates the social control of women of color and makes their victimization less visible. So now we could look at arrests. So the unfortunate empirical reality, as shown by people like Amanda Robinson, says that police often view battered women of color as less deserving of legal protection and often offer a lower quality of response to their victimization. So this lack of pursuing arrests often impacts women of color the most, as they're the ones empirically that are most susceptible to random violence as well as intimate partner violence. So for potential offenders or suspects who are women of color, the low visibility of policing also poses problems. So police misconduct that doesn't fall under the egregious category of rape often goes unacknowledged, while misconduct such as obtrusive behavior, so here I'm thinking about like custodial strip searches or body cavity searches, all the way to criminal behavior, so like sexual contact and harassment, is difficult to educate, and it can just be circumvented by claims of evidence preservation, or it could just be denied, because most of the time the courts side with police officers anyway. And moreover, the research shows that individual officers often have vague definitions of sexual misconduct, and that police departments often don't even have formal policies regarding sexual misconduct. So this poses problems for poor young women of color, again, as they're often most vulnerable to this misconduct and have few avenues for redress or recourse. So here we see how police activity of arresting, which people can assume to be gender neutral, can operate in both a racist and a patriarchal fashion. So finally, we can look at charging. Prosecutorial charging plays a significant role in how a case is adjudicated. So for potential offenders, since one criminal act can typically be charged under a variety of statutes, the amount of charges filed and the extremity are especially important. So we see to charge someone with intent versus intent to sell. So one of the interesting explanations for the increase of black female incarceration stems from the availability of conspiracy statutes to prosecutors. So these were originally reserved for the mafia. So these statutes were made to make prosecution of co-conspirators easier. So being able to get the kingpin all the way down to the lackey. But it's had the consequence of absorbing female partners of suspects into the system. So some of these women are marginally involved in criminal activity, or they're trapped in abusive relationships where their criminal activity occurred in the context of a relationship where they had little control. On the flip side, if we think about potential victims, if we think about discretion in the context of bureaucratic inaction or not taking action, we see how a significant number of sexual assaults are truncated at the charging phase. So Lisa Froman shows how prosecutors have developed different techniques to discredit victims' claims and not prosecute rape and sexual assault cases. So some of these techniques include trying to discover discrepancies and incongruencies in the victim's story, relying on real narrow ideas of what rape behavior looks like, trying to find incriminating knowledge of the victim's personal life, or trying to find their criminal connections or just presumptions of ulterior motives for filing these kind of charges. And she also shows how these techniques are used on women of color who are deemed as being less deserving of legal protection. So again, you see how race, class, and gender interact to disadvantage women of color who are suspects and victims in the charging phase. So I've attempted to offer some exploratory thoughts on how discretion in the criminal justice system reproduces gender inequality. And certainly every stone hasn't been unturned, but my main intention is just to provoke a more substantive discussion on discretionary power and discreteness in the aggregate. And I think that understanding these ambiguities and silences of discretion are important to race, class, and gender, and it offers us a productive way to think about the criminal justice system. And I also think that discretion is noteworthy because if we think about other notable public service agencies like schools, welfare offices, health agencies, and other industries where discretion is used and used to determine the distribution of materials, life chances, and outcomes, we see how important discretion is outside the criminal justice system. So I think a focus on this dark side of discretion, along with disproportionate impacts, can yield productive insights that lead to actionable items for reformers and activists, as opposed to just focusing just on disproportionate impact, which is also useful, but it's restrained in terms of American conservative jurisprudence. So I argue that until these fundamental issues of discretion are addressed, we'll continue to have truncated and distorted versions of equality and justice in the criminal justice system.
Okay, so Professor Marshall.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Courtney. Good morning. And I know that I really enjoyed the papers. So
Yeah,
I really have. Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about in listening to the papers is the sort of issue of black women, because I write about black women, sort of what I was thinking about my own sort of issues trying to get through my dissertation, because I graduated from UCLA and I was in the English department, and I decided that I wanted to write about sort of the figure of the black female criminal in American culture, and talk about trying to piece some stuff together to go from, when I really looked at how all the information about incarceration was very masculinist, particularly as it related to literature or to sort of crime and law and humanities more generally, and then to also try and figure out how do women fit into this picture, but again, to not really have anything about African American women. And so
what I really enjoyed about the papers is what I'm trying to do is sort of figure out what all this has to do with literature and with culture more generally. So if we have mass incarceration of African American women, what impact does that have on the novels that Black women write, the films that Black women produce, the music videos? I was just watching like Lady Gaga's new video. Like, what's that about? But also, how can we then sort of write against that erasure of the Black female presence as criminal? So not simply as victims of crime. So I just thought it was, just really great to hear like her today. And it's also good because I don't have to do all my statistics because y'all did a much better job than I could have. So thank you for both of y'all for that. So I wanted to start with a quote from Ida B. Wells from her text Southern Horrors, where she says, "A Winchester rifle should have a place of honor in every Black woman." And so I was drawn to that because I'm, sort of thinking about this era of late 19th century African American women's activism, which we sort of tend to think is sort of late Victorian. Women are interested in continuing to be sort of pious and Christian and docile. And I'm just sort of struck by sort of the way she says, no, we should take up arms. Like Black people should take up arms. And sort of the place, the juxtaposition of sort of honor and the home and this rifle. So I love it, and I love that she said it. Go ahead. And so I think, as I said, so our other presenters, I think, did a wonderful job of talking about the ways that the population of incarcerated Black women is growing exponentially. And so what I'd like to suggest is that these glaringly disproportionate incarceration rates make the criminal justice system an integral part of the lives of many Black women in the United States. So what I found when I first started doing my research was that anytime there was any discussion of crime in Black literature, and it was a man, so I'll say Native Son, for example, Black women often came in as being the moms or the sisters of the incarcerated man, or if we look at earlier texts of the lynching victim. And so I was always wondering, like, well, what happens to the women? Do we just kind of say, well, it doesn't have anything to do with me because I'm not a man, or it doesn't have everything to do with me because I'm also African American? How am I being targeted? How am I not being targeted? So what I'd like to do is talk a little bit about Catherine Russell Brown and sort of what she thinks we should do about for Black women and these images. And then a little bit about this beginning work that I'm doing about women and Black women and segregation in the late 19th century. Because what I found is really interesting is that we have all these instances of Black women being arrested and sort of publicly ejected from theaters, from theater balconies, from trains, and being arrested and fined and taken away. And I'm saying, well, this seems to me to be an important discussion that I think would do well in our thinking about race and gender and crime. So Black feminism's concern with how race, class, and gender work together as intersecting oppressions is important to explaining how the criminal justice system maintains a significant influence on the lives of African American women. And what I want to suggest is that the criminal justice system, despite I think some of the sort of erasures in sort of the scholarly literature, has always had a significant influence on the lives of African American women. And so the increased number of Black women who are incarcerated on probation and on parole currently requires that we actually revise our image of what Black criminals look like, so what we think of. So revising the image of the Black criminal, right, is easier said than done. So Catherine Russell Brown writes in her study, Underground Codes, Race, Crime, and Related Fires, she writes that while Black men are the poster children for the justice system, Black women remain off-center, blurry background figures. The underground coded message is subtle yet clear. Black women do not merit widespread criminological attention. So she attributes this neglect to image-making processes in America. So she writes that Black women occupy a unique space in the public and academic consciousness. In contrast to that for Black males, the locus for public discussion of Black female deviance is not in reports of crime. For Black women, it is deviance of another kind that carries the day. They are alternately represented as leeches, welfare recipients, pilferers, welfare queens, or undeserving employees, affirmative action beneficiaries. Or more generally, as irresponsible, promiscuous young women who are ready, willing, and able to become out-of-wedlock mothers. And so while I agree with her in that Black women do occupy, I think, a unique space, I think that these representations of deviance do impact reports of crime, right? And so one of the chapters that I worked on is prostitution in Harlem, and sort of the ways that the vice commissions and the law looked at Black prostitution, but also it was very different from the way that the Black community actually looked at prostitution. So again, we have a crime that we think sort of everyone will agree on, but we have very different ideas of the impact of prostitution, for example, in these communities. And so what I became interested in is tracking sort of Black women's sort of unique space within crime history, and also in culture. And here I'm thinking, there are some works that have been really useful to me, like Callie Gross's Colored Amazons, which is on Black women, crime, and violence in Philadelphia. LaValerie King's work on the development of the Black thief in African American literature, and some others that we can talk about if you really want to know, open lunch. So far, so what I found is that these Black women's imagined willingness to do anything for sex, right, and their irresponsibility have been historically construed as having the makings of a criminal, right? So not only are Black women sort of more easily led into crime, but by the sort of very fact that they then become like bad mothers, they also lead into sort of the men going out and committing crime. So bad mothers, bad wives, just bad everything, bad. So it's unacceptable that they are then invisible in criminological literature. Okay, so Catherine Russell Brown employed researchers to prioritize research on Black women in the justice system. Because, as she says, the barely visible research focus on Black women does not correspond with the figures showing their increased incarceration rates. So if they are being incarcerated in such large numbers, it just follows they will be highly desired as research subjects. But somehow that's not happening. So in closing her chapter, she makes 4 recommendations to the academic community. So the first is that the Justice Department should conduct a comprehensive report focusing on Black women in crime. Right, so she says it's not enough to make Black women an addendum to a report focused on white women or Black men. So secondly, social scientists should develop research interests in Black women. Leaving this task, which I thought was really smart of her to say, leaving this task up to Black women alone doesn't work because there are so few Black female academic researchers. So there must be awareness that this research will benefit all scholars who research issues of race and crime. She calls for the formation of a criminological journal devoted to the issue of Black women and crime. And finally, she wants this research to find a home in academic programs and criminology curricula. So as a literary scholar, I'm drawn to her image of Black women as being off-center, blurry, and background images, and the way these fuzzy images become reproduced within mass culture. So I'm especially intrigued by the possibilities this formulation holds for Black women writers and other cultural workers, and the extent to which we can use art to engage in debates about social policy. So I really like the things about the interracial dinner, because one of the things I'm sort of interested in is, so what role does literature have, sort of book circles and reading about these things together? How does that sort of help us move into more positive directions? So again, I want to suggest that the criminalization of Black women, both historical and contemporary, shapes Black women's literary and cultural production. And so I'm interested in how the legal stories our culture tells us about Black female crime impacts the stories that Black women tell about themselves. So law, like literature, depends upon language and argument. And so my project is invested in uncovering the ways they both speak about Black women's lives. So at the same time, I am interested in sort of how we can do this in sort of legal circles. I'm also not sort of letting Black feminist criticism, literary critics, sort of off the hook. Because I'm kind of wondering, so why haven't we been engaging in these questions of law? How can we read text like The Color Purple and not think about the law, or Beloved and the law? So just to finish up with Catherine Russell Brown, her sort of last assertion is that Our collective failure to embrace African American women as a worthwhile area of criminological study may reflect our lack of surprise at the data, which tacitly confirms the view that Black women are expected to be criminals. And so this is a sharp departure from the research that said Black males are the only ones affected by America's regimes of criminalization. So what happens is we don't talk about Black women because they don't commit crime, but then it's like we don't talk about them because they do commit crime. So it's like, well, what do you do? What do you do with that? So I'd like to now talk sort of a little bit about this new post-dissertation around this meaning of the ladies' car, or the first class railroad car. Because what I want to assert is that fighting over the meaning of this car, right, and there's a lot of research about the railroad and the train in American culture, became one of the most visible signs of Black resistance to the rise of Jim Crow segregation. And so what I want to ask is that in this pivotal era of American history, how does this train, this segregated train, try to define Black womanhood? Right? So what are we trying to do in the law, but then also what are people doing in literature to sort of rewrite Black womanhood after the end of slavery? Okay, so in 1881, the Tennessee state legislature passed a law requiring railroad companies to furnish separate cars, for colored passengers who paid first class rates. And so the first class car, which sounds really nice now, it had cushioned seats, clean floors, pretty cool, a toilet, but it also, more importantly, prohibited cursing and smoking. So not only was it sort of aesthetically pleasing and nice to sit in, but you weren't sitting behind the smokestack, so you could keep your clothes clean. You can open the window if you got hot, but also there was no cursing, which is sort of very different from the sort of other cars where you could curse, you could smoke. A lot of overcrowding, just really interesting sort of way that the train sort of maps out social hierarchies. So in 1884, Ida B. Wells sued the Chesapeake, Ohio, and Southwestern Railroad after she was forcibly removed from the first-class ladies' car. And we mostly know Ida B. Wells from her anti-lynching work. But at this time, she was a teacher in Memphis. So she was traveling in a ladies' car between Memphis and Woodstock, Tennessee. And she ignored the white conductor's request that she move to the smoking car. So according to Wells, the conductor asked her twice to leave the ladies' car before trying to forcibly remove her. So Wells explains in her diary that, quote, he tried to drag me out of the seat, but the moment he caught hold of my arm, I fastened my teeth in the back of his hand. He went forward and got the baggage man and another man to help him. And of course they succeeded in dragging me out. So I think here what I'm drawn to is the fact that she bites back. She's not calmly taken off the train, but also the violence with which they meet her body, that somehow her body's in the wrong place, and she should be moved. So she also says that white men and women stood on their seats and applauded as the conductor threw her out of the car. But rather than continue on to her stop, she gets off at the next stop and decides to sue the railroad for discrimination. So a Tennessee judge ultimately ruled in her favor, arguing that the company had violated the 1881 law that required them to furnish colored passengers with separate but equal first-class cars. So here they actually, I guess, had to have decent cars. But in 1884, Wells was again refused admittance to this first-class ladies' car, and she sued again. And this time she was awarded $500 in damages. And there's a great article that calls her a darky damsel, and says that she wins her $500. During that time, when I looked at some of these other cases, there's a lot of disparaging language against the black woman who was arrested. So in another article, there's a woman who's kicked out of a balcony and they call her a cheeky wench. And the article takes notice of the fact that she had the nerve to wear nice clothes and have perfume as she was up in the white balcony, and how that was such an affront to the larger society. So after the Tennessee Supreme Court actually reverses the lower court's decision and Ida B. Wells does not get her money, unfortunately, she wrote in her diary, quote, "I hope such great things from the suit for my people generally. I firmly believed all along that the law was on our side and would, when we appealed to it, give us justice. I feel shorn of that belief and utterly discouraged, and just now, if it were possible, would gather my race in my arms and fly away with them." Fabulous, fabulous quote. So what I want to move to, just to say, the criminalization of black women's presence in this lady's car was a challenge to segregation. So the fact that black women said, no, I do have a right, I paid my money, I can ride in this car, was a challenge to segregation law through the defense of their reputations, as quote, respectable women worthy of protection, and also their insistence on their rights as female citizens. And I have a few other cases where in 1879, a woman, we don't know her name, we know that she went by Mrs. Richard Robinson, unsuccessfully sued the Memphis and Charleston Railroad when she was denied access to the lady's car. A year later, a federal court awarded Jane Brown $300 when she sued the company for removing her from the car and forcing her to ride in the smoking car. So like Wells, Brown got off at the next stop, although unlike Wells, Brown was not physically removed, grabbed and thrown off the train. Now the lawyer for the Memphis and Charleston Railroad Company argued that Brown had been removed from the lady's car because she was no lady, by claiming that Brown was, as they said, a notorious and public courtesan, addicted to the use of profane language and offensive conduct in public places. The defense relies on antebellum legal precedent to define black women as unworthy of the rights and protections guaranteed to respectable and virtuous white women. So in order to understand these, to begin to understand these representations of black criminality and to begin to sort of center black women's experience, I think we must understand the ways that the power of Southern segregation legislated both black and white womanhood. In particular, the ways that the legal system in this instance rendered black womanhood abject. So what we have is, as black women claim to be ladies, they are arrested, right? So that's what, and then they come back and sue, and then they have to prove somehow that they're ladies. Sometimes it's successful, but oftentimes it's not. So gender dynamics between black women, as well as those between black and white women, are structured by segregationist law, which makes black women's conduct constitutive of a crime, right? While failing to punish crimes against it. So you can forcibly remove Ida B. Wells from the train and not be sort of thought to be, you're not hurting her by removing her, by grabbing her, but she's hurting you by sitting on the train next to you. So at the same time, the Southern lady is at the core of the region's sort of self-definition. Continues even after slavery is over. The identity of the South is contingent in part upon the persistence of its tradition of the lady, and its often violence, sort of forcing black women out of that tradition. So I want to end by just suggesting that these cases and these instances and others like them expand our understanding of 19th century black women's literature. So we look at something like Iola Leroy, where it is very much a Christian narrative. We're sort of interested in how black women's club movements are affecting change, and what are black women thinking about their role into the new society after segregation. I think we also have to pay attention to the ways that these sort of moves are criminalized and how the state comes down upon them. And so I want to argue that they expand our understandings of 19th century black women's literature by suggesting the criminalization of respectability. Right? So that in order to be respectable, you are by definition a criminal. And also to leave us saying that the yoking of black ladyhood and criminality has huge ramifications for the study of black women's legal texts, both sort of black women sort of as text, but also the text that black women write. And legal wrangling sought to render the term black lady or black female citizenship oxymoronic and criminal. And so ultimately what I'm saying is that we need more focus on the effects of segregation law on women. So what are the particulars, ways that African American women experience segregation as criminality, and also a reassessment of the ways that Black women experience a criminalizing culture.
Thank you. These presenters were really a delightful moderator. Presentation full of substance. Presenters aware of time and use it effectively. So I just want to thank you for being so nice to the moderator. We have about 20 minutes left, and I think probably the best thing to do is to open it up to the audience. Joseph, we're going to have an intimate conversation with the audience. So can you come down and join us? Okay, so first question.
So I have two questions. The first one is for Courtney. I wonder if the politics of respectability is working in two ways. One, in terms of, as you talked about, the criminalization of respectability by the law denying respectability to Black women, but then also in terms of, say, African American studies where Black women have to be respectable in order to enter into the canon. I think it's in some ways sort of striking that the history of civil rights resistance sort of necessitates that, where Black men can be outlaws, right, and still be sort of part of that structure, but Black women have to, say, be Rosa Parks, right, even though there were a whole lot of Black women that were doing the exact same thing as her. She needed to be sort of the respectable woman in order to be the figurehead. So sort of, I guess, sort of that side of it, it's like that our history of civil rights resistance doesn't engage enough with the criminalization of Black women and their resistance because of the respectability issue. But also, I don't know if you looked at, say, Barbara Welke's work on the railroad. She looks at honor and respectability. And the Supreme Court case, Hobby v. Queer, which was a case of the lead Black woman who was thrown out of a steamship in Louisiana. And it's something that we should really look at as the parallel case of Plessy versus Ferguson, but we don't. Right? So that should be something to look at. And we can talk more about that later. With Joseph, I thought it was interesting what you said about emotion being something that should be tied into intelligent decision making. I thought that was really interesting because I think that with sort of liberal democratic values, we think the opposite, that you should be sort of a emotionless individual, someone like John Rawls, right, where you're supposed to be objective. But instead, you're sort of making a powerful critique of that. But I wonder how it works with, say, the argument of Shaun with discretion, which seems to be predicated a lot on emotion and empathy, but then that creates unequal outcomes based on race. So I was wondering if you could talk more about sort of the role of emotion, like sort of identifying it as sort of a positive in some ways, bringing people together, but potentially a negative in terms of how issues of inequality can then be sort of used to create negative outcomes.
Sure. I guess the general point is that if you feel like positive emotion and empathy for the other person, then you're more willing to like kind of listen to the other person's argument and let it impact you, as opposed to just creating a wall. And so, because right now what I see, like the status quo is that one, well, on the political side, like Democrats, Republicans think they're evil. And then I remember like yesterday we had this discussion with Susan Cho, and I talked to her how does intersectional research, how can we use it to persuade the other side? And then she mentioned how, well, you need reason and enlightenment, but they don't have it. And so it's not going to work. Then our whole conference is based on, how can we impact social change, right? If you do all this research, but just assume it's not going to have any impact on the other side, just like speaking to the choir. And so for me, let's break it down and think about how can we talk to those Tea Party activists to talk about why we need healthcare reform. And I think you can kind of break it down, find settings where instead of demonizing each other, you understand who they are as individuals. It's a lot harder to demonize. some settings it's very important to create settings like like karate schools and anime, salsa dancing, where people can get to know each other as individuals. That's number one component. Number two is that for my personal research, the concern is not so much conflict, it's more about indifference. Like they don't care. And so a lot of these Korean students, like, they don't know why they have to learn about Black History Month, or they don't even know why they have to do the Pledge of Allegiance. They think it's a waste of time. I ask them, like, what does it mean to be American? And they say, I don't know, because I'm surrounded by Koreans. And I don't know why to do the Pledge of Allegiance. It's a waste of time. It's not going to get me into, like, Harvard. Learning about Black History Month is not going to get me into, like, UCLA. And so just like total indifference. You just don't care. But then if you kind of break that, because some of my Korean students, they also do like martial arts, and one of their master instructors is Mexican American. And so he's one of the very few positive role models that's from another race. And they recognize that all of these maybe not all Mexicans are negative. Maybe, and so the idea is that by developing that personal connection is that first step. And so the idea is that become friends first, and then learn about culture, politics, and other things. So I think that kind of ties in with Shaun, that positive emotion, empathy between different races can lead to better rational discussion.
It seems to me, maybe Shaun will take care of this, but it seems to me that this raises a question as to whether emotions and rationality are opposites. It would seem to me that it is quite possible that certain kinds of emotions facilitate rationality, and the other way around. Having done a lot of research on the civil rights movement, I remember interviewing a lot of activists who said that, once they really engaged in powerful singing with each other, really connected with each other, felt each other, then they could start talking and working out tactics and strategies and so forth. So it may just be that in Western culture there's a false dichotomy between emotions and rationality. Shaun, do you want to say something?
I think it's interesting that you brought up the point of indifference, because that's something that I've been thinking about, is just this idea of racial indifference. It seems like a lot of the literature on race hasn't done a good job of capturing mental states that aren't marked by racial animus. And I think one of the things that I've been thinking through is how racial indifference influences bureaucratic decision making. So a lot of times if we think about something like racial profiling, like paradigmatically, it's the white cop and the black suspect. But in many cities, like Los Angeles, the police force, there's a substantial amount of black and Latino officers, and some of them do have racial indifference and don't necessarily think about how their bureaucratic discretion exacerbates inequality in the system. So I think the point about indifference is also important as well, and it kind of unsettles the dominant models of what racism looks like.
Sure. Maybe a good first study, and also for years when the paper was citing, we talked about that people are foundedly rational.
Right.
And so people are lazy, right? Like for most Korean parents, it's like, okay, any school that has a lot of Mexican, bad. Some of them, they just take mental shortcuts. They're bondedly rational, so they think any racial interaction is bad. And I think, by creating this kind of emotion, having this personal emotional bond with like a Mexican karate master, kind of pushes people to go beyond their boundaries, so to become more rational.
Professor Marshall, did you want to respond to?
Oh no, I was just say thank you. That was a great thing. And I think I like what you said about black women need to be respectful in order to enter the camp. Because you're right. There's lots of work on the bad black man like Stagger Lee or the outlaw for African American men, but there's no equivalent for women. And I think really quickly one of the texts that I work on, Dan Petrie's The Street, sort of just symbolizes that problem where we have this black woman who's she lives in Harlem and she wants to be like Benjamin Franklin, but she makes no money, and she is very antagonistic towards this other black woman who owns a brothel in her building. So by the end of the novel, Ludi Johnson, the protagonist, who's been trying to be like Benjamin Franklin, murders a man. But then the brothel owner just keeps on going and making money. So, yay for her. But in looking at the criticism about the book, it always says that, Ludi gives way sort of to her emotions at the end. Like, so the ending of the book is bad because it's forced. Why would a black woman, go out and, stab, beat this man's head in with a candlestick? Right? And it happens over and over again where even people like Mary Helen Washington, whom I adore, says that, there is no naturalism in black women's literature because black women are not sitting in caves, like, plotting out how to kill people. I'm like, well, that's not true. If we actually look at the literature, there are black women who kill. And I'm just sort of, like, wondering, like, where's the space to talk about that? But yeah, that's a great case. Thank you.
Yes.
This is Shaun. It's kind of a question, but kind of giving you some information. I did in Los Angeles County. There's the Los Angeles County Police, which I represented them. They're about 85% people of color. Full-on police officers, and split. 45% Latino, 45% African American, and a smattering of white guys. And they protect welfare offices, county parks, county hospitals. So predominantly both in employee and in constituent population, women of color. They made, and they still do, 40% less than the sheriff. And as well as not getting safety retirement, no police mechanism. So the discretionary decision making goes into the political realm of the 5 supervisors and the political apparatus that continually just said, well, they just can't be police officers because look who they police. And they're just different. And they actually did and they do different policing as well, because they actually suppress and prevent crime rather than chasing calls. And that's actually looked down at as well. And it's it would be a very interesting place to go to be able to reinforce what your thesis is saying. I'm happy to.
Yeah, we should chat. We should chat afterwards. But that's a good point.
I think the difference between the LA Sheriff's Department, which there's a Supreme Court case, U.S. v. Lyons, there was the use of chokeholds. And chokeholds were used to asphyxiate a number of people who were potential suspects. And if you look at the racial makeup of the LA County Sheriff versus what she's mentioned, it's also, when you talk about the decision-making process, also. And the rationale of the Supreme Court in upholding that it's really not a 1983 complaint, although they stopped the use of chokeholds at this point.
I was just thinking about, in both of your papers, this came to mind. I recently read a report how in New Orleans, the police and prosecutors there have been charging prostitutes as sex offenders, so that once they go into the system as a sex offender, they come out and they now have to register as sex offenders, which means they can't live near, schools or can't be near children, and just to me, like, I think that disproportionately affects women of color in New Orleans, and especially women of color who are economically disadvantaged and who need access to resources like, all the government funding. I wasn't sure from what you were saying whether you had to be charged with a federal crime to be not able to access the federal funds, or if it was across the board?
It's across the board. So if you're the U.S. government obviously does a lot of federal prosecution, but it's also access to federal funds if you are a state or local gun felon or a drug offender.
And I was just struck also with how much that must affect women to have to then be registered as sex offenders, which in certain cities, I know in Miami in particular, sex offenders can't live within 2,500 feet of any children. I was struck by that.
That's a state law or a city law?
That's a city ordinance.
For New Orleans?
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
That is, there has been by the legislatures in certain states an abuse of the sex offender, broad suite of sex offender laws. I think I wasn't aware of this in New Orleans. There are other areas that they're getting into with registry, and this almost big brother aspect of sex offender laws that's branching out into other areas, as in juveniles who have both juveniles who have underage sex are now considered sex offenders. Well, there is a retreat to that. I think there are now constitutional challenges to that, but it's not a population that people want to stand up for and fight for. So I'm not surprised that the law enforcement arm would use that, because it's a very powerful weapon. You have someone who has to register, and if they don't, then it's a felony.
Professor Brown, I wanted to ask you a question in particular, but I think it's for the panel and the audience as well. And that is, to what degree are we now, in terms of intersectionality research, possibly leaving the men out too much? And what I mean by that is that we know the poverty of the research and analysis when the women were left out. In particular, if I think about the women who are going to jail and leaving behind families, we don't hear anything about, well, what should be the role of the men, first of all, the fathers and other men in the community. What should be the role of the men in terms of working out this kind of reentry problem for dealing with the women who were incarcerated? It just seems to me that with intersectionality research, we ought to also focus on this real deep interaction between what's going on with men and women.
I think we are just beginning to understand what the generation of mass incarceration is doing, not just to the African American, but to our American culture, but we can use African American community, Latino community, because we're often researched. But Tracy Mears has done what I can't remember what the term is, but basically the devastation that one wreaks on a community who don't have functioning families, the social capital that is reduced by not having a male and female in the house. Or what does it mean to have incarcerated men as a dating population that women and children will not engage? Or what does it mean to have children in foster care being raised by their grandparents when both parents are incarcerated, or when there's the broken parental ties? So there is a lot of on-the-ground research with the family aspect, not just the male versus female. I think that's what intersectionality needs to do, is address the family structure, not just the male versus female. It's not gender necessarily, but whatever our construct of what family is, what is the effect of this on the family structure and on the children?
One more question, yes.
Thank you, that's a really interesting set of questions. My question is for Professor Lee. I'm wondering whether you've done, because I think essentially what you're talking about is contact theory.
Right.
And I'm wondering whether you have done any research to explore the reasons. I think you talked about interracial dinners, the reasons for the white congregations saying that they would support government aid for black communities, and the black communities saying that they wouldn't support it. If if you've done any qualitative research to understand the reasons for those choices. That's the first part of my question. And then related to that, really whether, and if so how, you would make sense of what your essential argument is around emotions and equality in terms of critical race theory and the notion of interest convergence, and specifically the argument that white groups are only going to make decisions relating to minoritized groups that actually benefit them themselves, white groups themselves, so that they don't lose their position of dominance and supremacy. Because it seems to me that that kind of more complex and sophisticated side of the analysis and think about how policies shape out and ultimately serve to benefit white groups could be pulled into some of your analysis.
So quickly, because we are out of time.
That's like in terms of qualitative. I actually studied a group called the Chicago Church of Christ. It's called the International Churches of Christ movement, and also a group like Jehovah's Witnesses. And one thing I found is that once you join these churches, like the principle of inclusion becomes very strong. And so like the African American members, like we talk about racism, and then they say like, well, is racism a sin? And they say, well, if it's like really like hardcore racism, but then it's like, but then most people we know are kind of ignorant, and so they try to get to know it. So they try to think of ways to include the other. And I think that data shows that white people who attend interracial churches are more likely to support government into blacks because they think that government should help all people, including blacks. Whereas black people,
they won't be disadvantaged by the policy.
That's my second point, is that by joining these churches, they kind of redefine what it means to be the self and what is self-interest. And so maybe before they join the church, the self might be like, I'm a white person, so black people, they're not part of the self. But then once you join like a Chicago Church of Christ or Jehovah's Witness, your self becomes is connected to the other. So you're not just a white person, you're also a disciple, or you're also a Jehovah's Witness. And so you want to, and so ideally you want to think of policies that would help members of your group, which is not multi-ethnic. And so the idea is that the self is not static, it's dynamic, depending on which conception of democracy, which conception of identity you hold. And so my point is that America has a tendency to both be very static and separate. And so myself this is what it is, and it's not going to change. And then there's also this dynamic model where the self changes. So it's not just white, or it's not just Korean, but it's like it changes, and it changes because of my interaction with the other.
Let's end on a question rather than an answer. You had a question?
Actually, I think this is such a fabulous panel. I mean, each one of these presentations was so rich. And so I'm just thinking about solutions to what is essentially a criminal problem that we have. I mean, what has been created here is a criminal problem. So how do we use both reason and emotion? How do we use rights and stories to start changing people's minds? So that's what I'm trying to think about with each of these presentations. How do we create the social change? It's not just in this room, and we're not just preaching to the choir. That how do we really have this make an impact? And how do we use both, again, the stories, the facts? I mean, we just did this study at the Henderson Center at Law School at Lowell, showing on the employment barriers for formerly incarcerated women. And we found what we know, we knew we were going to find, that those barriers are greatest for African American women, and that actually for African American women, the barriers are so great that having a felony conviction doesn't make them that much higher, because it's such a bad situation to start with. But that when those figures get out there, they get out there in this kind of an audience. They don't get out there to people whose minds we need to change because we're not communicating in the right way. The facts don't matter. We have to tell the stories. We have to make these connections.
So let's give the panel and the audience a round of applause.